Hey, everybody, welcome. If you haven't noticed, it's springtime in Charlotte, North Carolina. How about that? As people are getting on here, we're going to stall a little bit because Jack is in a meeting and evidently it's more important than this one. I can't imagine, but nonetheless, he'll be coming on here as well. And I do have a scenario that has already come in that we want to run through the experts, but I definitely want to wait until Jack is on. So as you guys are jumping on here, please use the Q&A button to hit us with questions, and you can harass us with chats. And so as a bonus today, I'm wearing this t-shirt. I love it when they call me Big Papa because I became a grandfather for the 4th time yesterday, the first time that we had a little girl. So I'm going to show you a quick picture of her right now. Meet Violet, the newest small fry of the tribe, and don't mistake her cuteness for weakness. So anyway, that's my shameless plug on the front end of this thing. Adam, North Carolina failed to meet my expectations that at the stroke of midnight they would actually ratify a bill. You want to pontificate on that one at all?
Well, yeah. So it's hard. Like, there's nobody at the North Carolina General Assembly that you can call, and I have not tried my own legislature. But if you look at House Bill 334, so if you just Google H334, you'll get the current status of the House bill, which is scheduled for a vote. It says placed on Cal April 15th. Placed on Cal, if you look at the bill history, means that it's gotten a recommendation to pass from every subcommittee that it's been to this point. So in theory, this baby is supposed to go to the way that I read that was that it's supposed to go to the floor today, because I don't know enough about how the General Assembly operates. And the but it's not on the legislative calendar. But since the bill text says placed on calendar April 15th, on the 14th of April, I could also see that, well, look, did somebody really get the legislative calendar updated, at 9 o'clock in the morning when I checked it this morning? So that's a long way of saying, you're right, they didn't last night. But at the same time, and I don't know enough about how this legislative calendar thing works, but it appears that it's on the docket and it's passed through the committees that it needed to pass through to get a favorable. So the committees are recommending it for a vote of yes. So we shall still see. And yes, it is way too late, and this is ridiculous, but it seems like they're actually doing something, unless I got that totally wrong. And Jack, as you're logging on now, I'm giving you plenty of time to fact check me on this one. Talking about House Bill 334, the North Carolina PPP extensions, or PPP expense payments. So I had, that's what I know about that one. The other one is, if you can post it in our chat, Gary.
All right.
Sorry about the dogs there.
FedEx.
No, not quite. Andrea Hustler. If you look at the if you in the chat, the OMB has released a draft of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund application out there. There's still a target for. Sorry about the dogs.
Those shot collars aren't working.
Well, he doesn't have it on. I should be shocking him now. And then the old dog, she doesn't even know what she's getting shocked about. So they released a draft of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund application, and they say it's late April. They're supposedly going to do a pilot with a few people that they think would be affected. Priority's still on, smaller companies, first come, first serve, money's going to run out, the usual threats. What I do wonder about, though, they say the money's going to run out, but considering that it's offset against PPP funds we received, I am kind of curious if they're maybe over anticipating. I think that everybody and their brother should apply, but I'm also wondering if they're over anticipating how much they're actually going to give out. But I would still apply early and apply often. That was a joke, by the way. Apply early and apply once. But
Unless
on the other hand,
yeah,
I think
multiple times.
one of the things they keep on saying they're doing, I'm a little bit dubious of it, but what they're saying that they're going to do is they're going to have the ability to link directly in with some of the common POS systems like Toast and Square, just to pull sales data directly from those systems. But at the same time, if you look at the application, maybe they'll waive this, maybe they won't, but you're still supposed to provide tax returns, Form 4506T, which is an authorization for the SBA to have your IRS transcript for the applicants, which means the individuals that own the company, presumably to show that, yes, you do file tax returns and you are, not delinquent with your taxes. So there's still some bugs to shake out of this baby. But, they're saying late April. I don't know. It's April 15th, but I guess it's sort of like, I'll get that to you tomorrow. Well, tomorrow could be 11:59 p.m. when I thought it was 5 o'clock. So I kind of would have thought this was getting to be late April, but that's just me. But anyway, the form is out, which shows that they've at least made some progress in terms of how they're going to do things. They did eliminate the requirement to get registered with that, to get a DUNS number, to get registered with the System Award Management or whatever it's called for the other grant application. So now it's just going to be straight to the SBA. That is all that I know today. And David, to that, Gary just put it in the chat. So if you follow that link, that's the draft application.
Jack, before we jump over to you, a question that did just come in. Any update on PPP2 fund balances left to distribute? And I just found this last night, but it's a week old now, and it was 68 billion left, is what a CNBC article had. So
yeah, I can share some numbers because I found some. This is as of yesterday. So it's on the American Action Forum website, and it's, let's see. So just a quick rewind of the tape, CD, DVD, whichever generation of technology you're in. December 21st, Congress passed with Trump's approval, which they're calling round 2 essentially, right? And so what it did is at the time there was 147 billion that remained in the program at the end of round 2 from that authorization. So round 3, which they're calling what President Biden did on March 30th, they took that 147 billion, they kind of shuffled it into column number 3 or bucket number 3. And then they added 7.25 billion into the program. And so as of the 11th, it looks like that the SBA has dispersed 755 billion of the 813 billion so far appropriated by Congress to the program. And then as of round 3, 51 billion or 18% of round 3 PPP funding. So the combination of what was additionally authorized plus which was pulled from round 2 is into round 3. Now it's semantics in that, it's not as if you go and apply for, different rounds necessarily. There's a round 1 and a round 2. Round 2 and 3 are kind of combined in essence for application purposes and for forgiveness purposes. So it's really the rounds in this instance are the infusion of money into the system. So it says from that about 18% of round 3 PPP funding has been or remains available to the program. So that's why there is a sort of a rush to say, okay, get it going and get it going sooner than later in order to get these funds. Something that you guys may want to touch on is, because I've gotten this question, is the interaction between PPP and the ERC. I know we talked about it a lot, but the main question has been, okay, do I go ahead and submit my forgiveness for PPP? And I really haven't dabbled in the ERC thing because I just don't think it applies, or I don't think there's going to be enough money. The key issue is that you can't use the same time periods. If you get forgiven for a time period, then you can't use that same time period for the ERC. You guys have talked about that ad nauseum, but I don't know if it's worth another shout out to make that clarification, or at least me saying that, okay, be careful that you do look into it and see if it's something that is of benefit to you. If you don't have separate time periods to use, one for one and one for the other, essentially. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, my recommendation on that to our client base, Jack, has been, if you didn't meet the test for 2020, which is really going to be the period that it's going to be that people are applying for forgiveness now. If you didn't meet the test for 2020, which was, pretty clear, you were down, greater than 50% on any quarter-on-quarter comparison relative to 2019. If you didn't meet that test, truck away, But if you did meet that test, okay, let's kind of regroup, because to your point, there's a very set way that you're supposed to fill out your PPP application of forgiveness to establish eligible wages, because you can't use it for the same dollar. Like I can't claim ERTC for a dollar that I paid Gary, and then the same dollar I'm applying for PPP forgiveness on. But what I can do is, if Gary's on my PPP application, but Jack, you're not, I can claim you. So, but you have, like, it's wonky, but you have to, not claim all of your payroll expenses on your PPP application for forgiveness form that were in excess of what you needed for forgiveness, to establish those wages as being eligible during that cover period. It's freaking ridiculous and stupid, but that's the guidance that came out from the Treasury. So our point in that is, like, everybody would owe it to themselves to say, let me just double check to make sure I either pass or do not pass first test. If I don't pass first test, there you go. Because we have very few clients, with the ERTC, that the two eligibility requirements were either A, the gross receipts piece, independent of the employer size piece, but the gross receipts test, and if not the gross receipts test, shut down by government order. And a lot of our clients have asked questions around, well, hey, don't I apply as a shutdown for government order? The answer is, like, 9 times out of 10, freaking no, because they came out with some extremely specific examples around, like, Brown is a supplier to, Brown's only customer is someone who is shut down by the government. Does Brown qualify? No, he does not qualify as a government ordered shutdown. It's got to be, like, literally, you were called out in a government order as an industry that needed to be shut down. So that's really test two. You can't be a supplier in that industry and still qualify unless you met the gross receipts test.
All right, you guys ready for a word problem? It's not bad. So here's
as people can see, I don't normally sit in a location where I have a pen available to then write down as I would if I was taking the CPA. I don't know how the bar was, Jack, but the CPA exam again, it's like, okay, well, let me look at what they're actually asking for, all of this other stuff, and see if I can find the answer.
You have a pretty photographic memory. The question is do you have an auditory memory? So pay attention. So here's the deal. This company got a couple $1 million in PPP. They've got everything needed for forgiveness, but the substantiation of about $100,000 is left. And it has to do with lease payments. So we know that typically you need the original lease document. You also need an invoice, and then you need a proof of payment to show. Those are the three things that, as I understand them. In this case, they have the lease documents and they have substantiation for the payments, but they don't have invoices because all the expense liability was outlined in the lease documents. Will that suffice?
I mean, you're kind of stuck with what you're stuck with. So if that was me, I probably would have created a Word document that said, reference the lease document, no invoice was actually sent. And even better, if you can get the landlord to say, we don't normally send invoices, it's spelled out in the lease document, that's even better.
But are you saying that the lease it's all inclusive, like the rent includes utilities and everything else? And so,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, this is like, like Beacon's our landlord. They don't send us a bill either. We just pay them.
Yeah, another way of doing that would be to either have an addendum, or I would call it an acknowledgement of the use of the rent proceeds, and break it out and say, the parties hereby acknowledge and agree that the rental payment, lease payment made in the amount of X dollars is allocated as follows, and have both parties sign something like that. A one-pager, very easy to do. Not saying that would work, but it seems logical that you have the parties acknowledging that is the case, and then you show the payments that are being made and how they're allocated. So I mean, that may be your next best way of doing that.
Those are both fantastic ideas. I like that. See, you guys are pretty sharp. That's good. All right. So I knew we could count on Robert. He always has the best questions. So pay attention to this one too, because you're going to have your thinking cap on. All right. If a Schedule C is now receiving their PPP first draw and it's at the maximum of $20,833, do they need to wait 24 weeks to apply for the second draw, PPP second draw?
I thought it was just as soon as it was spent.
Jack,
so I mean, it could have been 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's a very good technical question. Thank you, Robert. Because I'm just kind of, again, thinking, is it related to the use or the submission of forgiveness, and then you have an unresolved borrower issue where there might be something associated with either the application or the application or the forgiveness application itself. So let me punt on that and let me think about it, and Robert, we'll get back to you.
Okay. He has a couple other questions. Chris. It's just a small world here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And, never burn a bridge with somebody, because you're going to probably work with them later on. And so it's pretty funny. And basically Chris just acknowledged, yeah, Robert, you have really good questions. If they don't wait and apply for the second draw in a few weeks, or a few weeks after receiving the first draw, does that make for an overlap of the PPP usage period? And would that be a problem for full forgiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, my operating theory is that your cover period starts when you got the money. You happen to have got the money late, so cover period starts, you spend it in 8 weeks. You're supposed to have spent the money before you get the second round. So I think you might have troubles getting the second round unless you had that money spent before the May 31st extension period, which is your last day to apply for forgiveness. So, I mean, if you just received it, that could be a problem pending further guidance with getting round 2.
Yeah, and it's also semantics, but important semantics, that spending versus receipt of the second set of funds versus applying for it. So, you could have maybe a situation where you may not have spent all of the first round. You apply for the second round, but you don't get those funds until after after the covered period. So technically it's not a breach of the terms and conditions of both loans. So again, Jack theory that we'll look into and make sure that we get it right.
Yeah. I think where you probably will be stuffed would be you probably cannot have overlapping cover periods, given that the original intent was to say you can't use PPP2 for PPP1. That's the reason they wanted you to spend the PPP1 money.
So, Robert, this should also make you feel better because another regular attendee on here, David, he always asks great questions too. And he says, I agree with Adam. I've not seen that there's any time.
Which is rare. Thank you.
Take that as a win.
Oh, Lori. Yes. I got one back. I love you, David. I got one past professor.
So just so long you use all the money for a qualified expense. So thank you for weighing in on this one, David. Good questions. All right. Any other questions out there? No, I've looked at the attendee list and I know we have some BGW people who are getting CPE on here.
Good for you guys.
While they're crashing the gates for April 15, even though it's technically moved to May 17. Hey, speaking of that, because I have heard from some clients this week, they are confused. Like, wait a minute, we have to pay April 15, our Q1 2021 payments, but our taxes have been pushed to May 17. What? So, Adam, you want to pontificate on any of that as well as any of the other deadlines that are looming? So C corporations without an extension are due today too, I think, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, if you just go into the, hey, that makes 0 sense. If the whole point was to give me a little bit more time to generate some cash to make some payments, one would have thought that they would have changed the extension payment due date too, like they did the first time when they moved everything to July, but they didn't. And I kind of feel like that was probably due to, I don't know, maybe it was due to fatigue. I don't, like I'm tired of asking for stuff. At the administration, I'm getting too much static over this stimulus bill that I just passed. Who knows why that is, but that technically is correct, that you're supposed to pay your estimate before you pay what you owed for the prior year, when in the past those are usually due on the same day. So they didn't move the day. So if you kind of look at, all right, what would happen if I didn't do that, and instead I just overpaid my extension payment or my tax payment on May 17th to include the first quarter estimate, it's not exactly clear whether or not the IRS or anybody else is going to waive penalties and interest on that 1 month gap. That being said, we calculated it's $250 for a $100,000 payment. So it's, it's money, but it's also de minimis in the absence of having any clarity. I'm not officially supposed to advocate one way or the other on this. I'm going to tell you to follow the law that's in place at the time. Follow the law. But it's a pretty de minimis penalty if you took a flyer and said, look, I'll just pay everything in on May 17th and have the overpayment apply the first quarter estimate, which is that's a pretty common thing that we do at BGW, barring if there were no date changes.
So any other questions out there? Hit us up. And while you're doing, I'm going to stall for this. This is actually a pretty funny thing. So I was on the phone with a friend who is at a much larger CPA firm, and they've done a pretty good job of PPP stuff, but we've been at it much longer than they have. And one of their clients said, we really appreciate what you guys are doing, but you're a little stiff. We wish you could be a little more like BGW. That is a true statement. It's so funny. So
That
anyway,
is pretty funny.
we're an acquired taste for some, and we're not for everybody, that's for sure. But anyway, I thought that
Gotcha.
was funny.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
All right, come on, y'all, light us up, or we're gonna shut this down early, man. I mean, come on, 25 minutes. I mean, I know we could tease another word problem out of Robert. And while David's on the line, what are you seeing as any trends? Because you've been, helping a lot of folks too. You've been on our webinars pretty faithfully. What are you seeing out there, David? I'd be curious if you're still on here. Aha, good. Lots of confusion around ERC. Oh yeah.
Yeah. No,
That's why I
I
brought it
would
up.
agree. Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, the best answer I can give is just go back to that gross receipts test. If you're greater than 50%, hit pause and say, okay, I need to go look at something. If you qualify for PPP2, then it means that you qualify for the ERTC and you should do something for the first quarter of 2021. I mean, that's kind of just, when I say do something, it's notify your payroll company that you've experienced a reduction and you qualify for the credit, and they should be able to help you from there. Is the best advice that we've been able to give clients at this point. In that, if you need to go back and get money for 2020, if it's like life, stabilization cash for you, get moving on an amended payroll tax return now. But if it's otherwise not, it's like you usually have 3 years to amend a tax return before you pass statute of limitations. So there's not a huge rush on making something happen.
Interesting. Here's some follow on from David on that. He said, lots of folks want to take advantage of it, but payroll companies can't handle it. He's spoken to Paychecks, and they want you to come up with a calculation for current periods before they file the 940.
By calculation, I mean, that's basically just saying, look, you need to flag the eligible employees and then give it to them from the payroll systems that I've heard about. So you would like tag Jack and say, Jack is eligible, credit calculates, appears on your 940.
Yeah, they don't want to take on the liability of picking and choosing and all the information like
Right.
that has to come from the employer, and they're just processing what you tell them to process.
Yep.
Here's another question, weird question. If your entire business doesn't fit in the government shutdown, does that eliminate you from qualifying for the additional grants? They have different lines of business.
So if that's related to the employee retention tax credit, meaning like, hey, we were shut down, like part of our business was shut down. So, but not all of it. It doesn't hurt to try, but understand that your risk is that a lot of times they look at these things based on your primary NAICS code. So, which is supposed to represent, 50% or more of your business. So just understand, like, if that was me doing it, then I probably would go for it because it's technically, right, but understand that it's not going to be black and white whether or not the dog's going to hunt. But so I wouldn't blow all the, because I fully believe in taking every credit where every credit's due. And we had something very similar on PPP round 2, where we had similar situation with PPP round 2, where, through a series of events, the NAICS code that they originally had on their tax returns was different from what they are today, and it never got updated because it's not something that's really used for anything. Well, now it is. So, and some people were being sticklers on what that NAICS code is. So I probably would take that approach that, look, we only, everything's buttoned up right. We only looked at this line of business. It's only for this piece, and then only calculate the credit based on that basis, understanding that it may not stick depending on how sticky they want to be on a form over substance question. I think you pass the substance question, but if you get somebody who's a form type person that doesn't care about the substance, you might be screwed. I mean, I would go for it personally, but understand that that's not without some risk.
Yeah, and he clarified, it was ERTC.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah. Next question. Our sub S firm received $254K in PPP round 1 in April of 2020. PPP 1 forgiveness was submitted this week. Our gross receipts were down 28% in Q2 2020 compared to Q2 2019. PPP covered period was 4/23/20 to 10/7/21. Wait, could that be 10/7/20? It has to be 10/7/20, wouldn't you think? Well, yeah. Isn't that overlapping covered periods as we look to apply for PPP 2?
No, because your cover period ended in 2020, but you're going to be applying in 2021.
Yeah, here they do say that it's cover period goes from April 23rd, 2020 to 10/7/21. Is that possible?
It's impossible. 10/7/21 hasn't happened yet.
I think he clarified it in a further comment down below. Yeah.
All right. I just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, it's 2020.
Yeah. No, you're not in overlapping cover period in that case.
Cool.
Cover period's expired.
Well, that's good news. Okay.
As they would say, the light is green, the trap is clean.
Go.
That is for you, Jack.
Next question. First PPP funds have not been entirely used because officers took pay cuts. Can we qualify for a second PPP?
I mean, you kind of depends on when you got the first draw, but you would have already been out of the cover period at that point. So I would, in that case, you're kind of in a weird area of you're already out of the cover period. So I probably would go back and look at that again to say, am I really thinking this correctly? Because, technically you exhausted your 24-week period to have exhausted the funds. So you technically have a loan now for that balance due, not some additional time to spend the funds. So if that was me, I probably would go back and relook and say, have I really calculated the forgiveness component correctly? And could I have been forgiven in 2020 to then go ahead and apply for 2021, assuming that I'd otherwise fully qualified? Because otherwise you've likely passed your cover period, and you'd be eligible to apply anyway. It's just that you've got a loan, but I guess in that case, again, we're speculating because we haven't had the circumstance happen before. But in this case, I mean, you probably would have to go through the forgiveness process, either return the round 1 money or accept the round 1 money that you've got left over as a loan to then get round 2 money is the only thing that I could think of, which is just messy. Instead, I go back and say, how do I show that I've spent all this money on qualified expenses?
I'm going to say something that will make you guys possibly cringe. And I'm not suggesting that you do this if it's illegal, inappropriate, or you're not able to do it. But, I see the word pay cut, and is it really a pay cut or is it a pay deferral? And so,
you're thinking like I think, Jack.
So, yeah. And
rerun the payroll and you just loan the company the money back. I mean, what's the difference? Thank you, Jack. I'll say it explicitly.
Good. I won't lose my law license today, or my pretend CPA license.
And I don't
Well, if
think
you do,
I don't think I could lose. I don't think that was unethical because it happens all the time. But
just stay at a Holiday Inn Express tonight and everything will be magically returned. All right, here's the next question. James says, we recognize PPP forgiveness in our fourth quarter financials. When doing the ERTC gross receipts test, do we include PPP forgiveness and gross receipts for Q4 2020,
Nope.
or can it be excluded?
It's excluded. It's just sales, like traditional sales.
That is a happy answer right there. All right, Robert, have there been any discussions about a PPP third draw?
If the question is another program, because we have one and we have two, and even though there's been several infusions, so in some people's perspective, we're at round 3 or the third draw, which is really, no, it's just replenishment or putting more money into the pot. So basically, if the question is there going to be a third pot? There's discussion about that. And I think the answer has to be yes in some form. But then you have people looking at our budget, our deficit that's increasing over the course of time significantly from where it's been historically. You have questions about the impact of giving out more money more so on the employee side of things. So unemployment benefits, is that keeping people on their couches versus getting back in their cars and going to work? And those kind of things. So there's different perspectives and different arguments on different sides of things, whether or not that money is really needed, or are we just kind of creating a, people putting their hands out. And I say that isn't how I feel. I know that we have a lot of clients and others that are still very much struggling, very much teetering on, kind of financial collapse and really do need that money. And so not belittling that, I'm just saying that there's, even though a lot of the abuses that occurred during round number 1 that they tried to fix in round number 2, there's still people who are taking advantage of. I mean, I could pull up any number of articles about people getting arrested and put into jail for financial fraud on PPP and other government sponsored and related items. So the answer is probably yes. Don't know if it will be in the same kind of form as the PPP, which is obviously focused on employment. It may be more related to core business financials and not necessarily on the employment side of things. Because if you recall, the initial desire was, and this whole program was, to put money in people's pockets, employees' pockets, via the employer who has the data in order to corroborate the fact that these individuals are not making the money that they need to survive. So again, yes, in some form, but don't know exactly if it's going to be a third bucket of PPP or not.
Anything else out there?
So I figured I'd share some really bizarre things. It's actually called Odd News. So about 22 hours ago or so, a groom goes to the wrong wedding venue, nearly marries a stranger because of a GPS error. The GPS took him to the wrong place, to the wrong church. A New York parent seeks okay to marry their own adult child. It's bizarre. Woman with the longest fingernails cuts them for the first time since the 90s, and there's a picture of them. I mean, it looks worse than
This is terrible.
Wolverine. Yeah, it's worse than Wolverine. Let's see, what else is good on here? Mafia fugitive caught after YouTube cooking show accidentally reveals his true identity.
Were you?
So,
Oh yeah, I did hear about that.
He's using his skills he learned in prison, like you see in movies, kind of cooking it up like the Italians do in the prisons. And then he got a new gig, once he's in. Unfortunately, he was a fugitive. He wasn't really out
Yeah, that was in a different country even, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it may have been. It was down in the Caribbean somewhere, I think.
Yeah. YouTube sensations can come back and haunt you. So here's a question from David. So the scenario is this: a Schedule C guy has bad credit. He was denied PPP. Can he sell his company to somebody with better credit and get the PPP? Have you seen examples of a buyer getting a PPP? How does that work?
Well, technically the buyer, I mean, they were pretty clear that a buyer actually qualifies using the past history. So that guidance came out sometime over the summer of 2020. So, if you buy a business and the business did not receive PPP funds, but otherwise would have qualified, then you can apply yourself, even if you're the buyer.
Yeah, I think the way to look at that in a transaction is I don't want to say it's an asset, but it's a potential asset that, if let's say they had received the funds and then were on the block for sale, then obviously the value, well, I shouldn't say obviously, likely the value would be here. But because they didn't get the PPP funds and they had to subsidize those costs, the value of the company on the books, just the financials, is likely going to be less. So the sale price would be less. So maybe one of the benefits of the transaction is you're buying at a lower price, but you're also buying this potential asset that you're going to exercise and go get. There's still the risk that you may not get it, and you also have the cost of time and actual expense in processing all of that. So that has come up in a topic of conversation in negotiations in an asset sale. There are also requirements with respect to when you buy a company, and we've talked about this, but it's been a long time ago, so just a quick refresher, that in a transfer of ownership, asset or stock, that there are requirements that if the seller business has applied for PPP, that there be some escrow and other processes that are put in place with respect to that transaction. And some buyers are not necessarily happy with that, because that essentially is possibly a holdback on the price, and someone has to fund that escrow. So again, just some things to think about if you're in an M&A transaction and there's a PPP component to the discussions and negotiations and the allocations pre-closing and post-closing.
So this follow-on question probably applies to you, Jack, but it says technically, yes, a buyer can get PPP, but they always get caught in the problem that EIN numbers don't match. What's the actual process of getting this past the robotic SBA scanners?
Go ahead.
So, well, I was going to say, I can't speak to what happens with robotic scanners. All I know is that I've had to cut and paste the SBA, literally the Treasury guidance document that says, yes, even if the EIN number is not the same, this qualifies for the application. It said it's sometime in June, I believe it was June, that the Treasury came out with that guidance. So I can't speak to the robot other than, okay, got kicked back out. Bank should say, hey, that's BS. It clearly qualifies here, and get it resubmitted.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's no way to get past the algorithm. It's going to take some manual effort, and hopefully you have a banker who understands that and will be your advocate, either seller or buyer advocate. And typically the buyer, with the banking relationship, but I've had some sellers have to go to their banking relationships and basically say, okay, this is how it is, to educate and have the bankers talk on their trusted level rather than the lawyers telling them. But I've also had occasion to cut and paste some language as a gentle nudge as to that is the way it's supposed to be.
So you don't use the middle finger emoji when you do it like I do, or what? Just kidding.
When I do that, my emails actually, when I instruct clients that way, it says, do not forward this email chain, and then I express myself. So.
Sometimes I use the poop emoji too. That one's kind of cute.
You can just take a picture of your mug, Adam.
Yeah, there you go.
That was one of my favorite webinars where you you held up the mug at the beginning of it.
That was funny. The good old days of a year ago.
Yeah, I know. Golly molly. 56 weeks ago, to be exact. Oh my goodness. Any other questions out there? Good banter back and forth. This is good. Hopefully it's helped somebody. As a reminder, we will put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel this afternoon. So stay tuned for that. If anybody came on late, usually there are stragglers that come on a little bit later. So you definitely want to go back and watch the beginning of it and see a picture of my newest granddaughter.
Oh, did I miss that? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
All right. So you asked me to share it again.
Yes,
I'll
please.
do it. Look at that.
Oh, wow.
Is she cute or what? She's a fighter. Looks like Rocky right there. So
That's awesome.
All right. Well, any last call for questions or harassment? We're going to go in 5, 4, 3. Hey, you guys have a wonderful week. What's left of it, go and enjoy this beautiful springtime weather. And Jack and Adam, thank you again. Appreciate you very much. David, we appreciate you, and Robert and everybody else that asked questions. We do appreciate you. You guys have a great week. Stay safe out there.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Done.
All right, thanks.